North Korea was not always very poor. In 1948, a few years after its founding, North Korea was recognized as one of the most industrialized countries in Asia, easily surpassing South Korea and ranking among the top in all of Asia. Moreover, this economic prosperity lasted for a full 30 years. However, by the 1990s, North Korea's economy began to free fall, and there was an extremely severe food shortage. Since then, North Korea's economy has never truly recovered. This is truly a case of its rise being rapid and its fall being sudden. But North Korea is not without resources. North Korea's land area is 120,000 square kilometers, and it is quite rich in various minerals. A report by Goldman Sachs estimated that the value of North Korea's mineral resources is 140 times the country's GDP. Some European drilling companies believe that there may be oil reserves in the western seas of North Korea. However, today's North Korea is one of the poorest and most isolated countries in the world. The ups and downs of North Korea's economy contain many bizarre and intricate stories reflecting the changing tides of world politics, involving the struggles of great powers and the tears and blood of ordinary people. And all of this continues to influence the global situation to this day. That truly is too exciting. Hello everyone, this is Breaking World Big Dog. During the colonial period, the Japanese placed their heavy industry production bases in the northern part of the peninsula, which later became North Korea because it was closer to northeast China and rich in mineral resources. After World War II ended, a group of industrial workers and machines were left behind here. Taking advantage of these advantages, North Korea had a good start. But soon, the ensuing Korean War destroyed everything. In 1953, after the armistice, North Korean leader Kim Il-sung began to rebuild the country. Over the next 4 years, Kim Il-sung was involved in almost every matter, from collective farms, factories, mines, highways to residential areas, nurseries, museums, and various other places. He personally oversaw everything. On average, he would appear at the site every day. The North Korean economy quickly regained vitality, becoming one of the most industrialized countries in Asia. Of course, this was not an achievement brought about by Kim Il-sung's inspections. No one can simply inspect their way to an industrialized nation, but the visits of the supreme leader can boost morale and increase the attention of executing officials. However, the more important reason was the substantial assistance from the socialist bloc. In 1953, the Soviet Union provided 1 billion rubles in aid free of charge and also reduced previous debts. Additionally, other countries each had their own roles, fully assisting. For example, the Soviet Union was responsible for the reconstruction of the capital, Pyongyang, while East Germany took charge of the second largest city, Hamhung. Czechoslovakia assisted in building an automobile factory, Hungary helped construct a chemical plant, Poland helped build trains, and Bulgaria donated 20 million rubles. Not to mention there was also China. The Chinese government converted the materials and expenses from the war period into gratuitous aid and also provided substantial financial assistance. In 1953, this aid accounted for 18.4% of North Korea's annual income, increasing to 33.7% in 1954. In this way, by the late 1950s, North Korea's economy was on the rise. Many people regarded North Korea as a model for developing countries. It was also during this time, due to various political considerations. In 1955, Kim Il-sung proposed the Juche idea of socialism, which in the economic field manifested as accepting aid, but also ensuring that North Korea maintained a developed manufacturing capability, ideally being self-sufficient in everything. In this matter, the Soviet Union was not as enthusiastic in its support. For example, in 1958, North Koreans wanted to independently produce tractors. So North Korean engineers bought Soviet tractors and then disassembled them for reverse engineering. Due to lack of experience, soon after, the domestically produced North Korean tractors could only work in reverse gear. Reverse engineering and working in reverse gear sound like a perfect match, but soon North Korean tractors learned to move forward. And then North Korea began mass producing tractors. So at that time, the level of agricultural mechanization in North Korea was very high as an 8-story building. Not to mention South Korea, even China and India were left in awe. Tractor production is just a microcosm of North Korea's full-scale development of heavy industry. In the 3-year economic plan from 1954 to 1956, North Korea allocated 81% of its resources to heavy industry, with only 19% going to light industry. In Kim Il-sung's plan, once they had steel mills, heavy machinery, mines, fertilizer plants, and refineries as the foundation, they could then march south and unify the peninsula. This approach is sound, but the problem lies in the fact that North Korea is a small country with limited resources in all aspects, such as population. Developing heavy industry requires mobilizing a large number of rural laborers to become industrial workers. However, North Korea's food production is a novice. Only 20% of North Korea's land is arable. The terrain is rugged and the climate is cold, resulting in a shorter growing season for crops. If a large number of people are diverted, what will the North Korean people eat? What will they wear? Kim Il-sung thought of many solutions, such as reclaiming land, creating fields from the sea, and burning mountains to create fields, while also trying to increase the level of agricultural mechanization as much as possible. Finally, they largely achieved self-sufficiency in food. That's for eating. What about clothing? The material for the clothing of the North Korean people was eventually found in one of North Korea's main mineral resources, coal mines. By processing anthracite and limestone, they could produce fibers that could be turned into fabric. The clothes that Koreans wore at that time were pure waving clothes. But there were some issues, such as being relatively coarse and not easy to dye. But these were minor problems. Does not wearing bright enough clothes mean they can't unify the peninsula? And the investment in heavy industry indeed brought substantial returns. In 1960, North Korea's GDP increased fourfold. During this period, on the southern part of the peninsula, the person opposing Kim Il-sung was Syngman Rhee. From 1948 to 1960, the president of South Korea was always Syngman Rhee. He was born into the Jeonju Lee clan of the Korean royal family, with quite a high status. In 1905, he earned a bachelor's degree from George Washington University in the United States, and in 1910, he obtained a master's degree from Harvard University and a doctorate from Princeton University. His credentials were also impressive, as he was involved in the Korean independence movement from an early age. But this did not prevent him from being a complete failure when it came to managing the economy. After World War II, with the division of North and South, the dream for both sides was to unite the Korean peninsula. Kim Il-sung in the North planned to develop heavy industry to strengthen national power in preparation for the Grand Plan. Syngman Rhee, on the other hand, had a different approach. His policy was to unify first and then build, with no construction without unification. After all, what's more fun than running a dictatorship compared to managing the economy? South Korea did have opportunities to develop its economy, as the aid from the United States and other Western countries was not any less than what the North received. Between 1954 and 1960, the US government alone provided $3.6 billion in loans and trusteeship, not to mention the tens of thousands of American soldiers stationed in South Korea who needed to spend money. Moreover, to the ordinary South Korean citizens at the time, these soldiers had incomes comparable to that of millionaires. To give an extreme example, in order to generate revenue, the South Korean government even encouraged women to provide sexual services, resulting in tens of thousands of South Korean women bringing in a substantial amount of cash income. In short, despite receiving a large amount of foreign aid, the result of President Lee's efforts was that over 60% of the South Korean population lived in extreme poverty. In 1960, the year Syngman Rhee was overthrown, South Korea's per capita GDP was only $82, less than one-third of North Korea's, making it one of the poorest countries in the world. Also in 1960, a confident Kim Il-sung delivered his famous white rice and meat soup speech, telling the North Korean people that in the near future they would be eating white rice, drinking meat soup, wearing silk, and living in tiled houses. This was not an ideal, but the reality of tomorrow. This was for internal audiences. Externally, North Korea also began to heavily promote this, as the suffering people in the South would surely also like white rice and meat soup. In 1960, Syngman Rhee fled, and his successor was Park Chung-hee. Park Chung-hee's approach was more aligned with Kim Il-sung's. He hoped for South Korea to become an industrial powerhouse, and his competition was not North Korea, but the United States, Western Europe, and a rejuvenated Japan. Park Chung-hee's merits and demerits are quite controversial in South Korea, but there is one point everyone agrees on. He indeed brought shipbuilding, electronics, machinery, steel, automobiles, petrochemicals, nuclear energy, economic growth, more kimchi, coups, martial law, a daughter named Park Geun-hye, and a somewhat excessive national self-confidence to South Korea. This is what is known as the miracle on the Han River, and it encompasses more than just the economic aspect. During this period, North Korea was also developing quite well, meaning that both the North and South were growing at the same time, initiating an economic competition. To win the competition, Kim Il-sung also shifted his focus, turning his attention to the Western countries of Europe and America. The overall strategy was that if they can do it, so can we. North Korea planned to do business with Western countries, and this wasn't just wishful thinking. The international environment also allowed North Korea to do so. At that time, after US President Nixon took office, he improved relations between the US and China, as well as the US and the Soviet Union. Or rather, he improved relations between the East and the West as a whole. Who wouldn't want to engage in a profitable business when conditions permit? Business with Western countries involved North Korea exporting various domestic resources. The largest exports were various non-ferrous metals, while imports included machinery, grains, equipment, steel, and chemicals from Europe and America. However, the resources outside the country and the money were not sufficient, so North Korea began to take loans from everywhere for development. Between 1970 and 1975, North Korea borrowed a total of approximately $1.2 billion. These figures do not include other funds provided to North Korea by the socialist bloc. Both the North and South were developing well, creating a situation where they seemed to be hand in hand on the road to prosperity, with the implication that whoever lost would be the fool. But this beautiful scenario was eventually ruined. This whole thing, well, it's all Israel's fault, or you could say it was Nixon's success and also Nixon's failure. In 1973, the Fourth Middle East War broke out, with Israel and the Arab countries clashing fiercely, and the Nixon administration chose to support Israel, secretly sending a lot of arms. However, the planes transporting the arms were discovered, and there were Arab countries with good relations with the US, like Saudi Arabia, the world's largest oil producer. Saudi Arabia expressed its displeasure, and the Americans were quite embarrassed, so they launched a series of diplomatic reassurances. To summarize, the idea was this: we, the United States, are providing weapons to Israel not to fight you Arab countries, although it indeed affects you, but the real purpose is to counter the Soviet Union. This is our American strategy of indirectly targeting the Soviets. The Arab countries obviously couldn't understand this strategy, so they united to sanction Europe and the US, refusing to sell oil to these Western industrial nations. This led to the famous first oil crisis. Without oil, Western industrial production couldn't operate at full capacity, leading to a significant decrease in demand for various mineral resources. As a result, the prices of these resources also dropped significantly. Consequently, North Korea's main export, non-ferrous metals, couldn't be sold. As a result, they couldn't repay the debts they had previously incurred. Furthermore, after 1977, North Korea entered negotiations with countries like Japan, West Germany, and Italy, and these negotiations quickly fell into a cycle. To this day, some organizations have estimated that North Korea's accumulated debt is at least $12.5 billion owed to both Western countries and the former Eastern European countries. North Korea did try to find ways to repay the money. For example, in August 2010, the Czech Republic demanded that North Korea repay a loan of $10 million. After some back and forth, Pyongyang offered 400 tons of ginseng to offset part of the debt. However, the Czechs don't consume much ginseng. At most, their annual consumption is only about 2 tons. Therefore, for the next 200 years, the Czechs would have a plentiful supply of ginseng, which is quite amusing to think about. However, there was still business to be done here. A secondary market emerged around North Korean debt, where some bold investors bought North Korean debt at a rate of 6 cents on the dollar. They are betting that one day the North and South will eventually reunify, and that the South will unify the North, at which point South Korea would be willing to repay the debt. At present, this seems quite unlikely. The feeling of holding this debt might be somewhat similar to how the Czechs feel about their ginseng, which is quite amusing to think about. Around 1980, the debt issue caused the North Korean economy to stagnate. It was also during this period that the economic power balance between North and South Korea reversed, with the South's GDP and technological development beginning to surpass the North. During this same period, the North Korean leadership made some additional poor decisions. In 1982, for Kim Il-sung's 70th birthday, North Korea undertook 3 major gift projects: the Grand People's Study House, the Arch of Triumph in Pyongyang, and the Juche Tower. The Grand People's Study House covers an area of 100,000 square meters and houses 30 million books. The Arch of Triumph in Pyongyang is taller than the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, claiming to be the tallest in the world. The Juche Tower is entirely constructed of white marble, standing at 170 meters tall, surpassing the Washington Monument. These structures may have served to unify the people's spirit, but at that time, North Korea's economy was in decline, and the people's livelihood was struggling. Such expenditures essentially harmed the North Korean economy. But that's not all. North Korea also undertook many other vanity projects at the time. Let's discuss a few of them. However, before we discuss them, it should be noted that these matters can actually be blamed entirely on the then IOC president, Juan Antonio Samaranch. Let's start from 1984. In September of that year, Seoul in Gyeonggi Province and other areas in Chungcheong Province, South Korea, were hit by severe floods. Nearly 200 people died, thousands of houses were submerged, and tens of thousands were left homeless. A few days later, the North Korean State Broadcasting Service announced that North Korea was willing to provide relief supplies to the South Korean disaster victims, including 7,300 tons of rice and 500,000 meters of fabric. It's not unusual to convey information through broadcasting, such as the offer of 100,000 tons of cement and medicine. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Soviet Union used broadcasting to send messages, and North Korea offering aid to South Korea is similarly not surprising. Previously, whenever South Korea faced any natural disasters or crises, North Korea would express its willingness to extend a helping hand. But South Korea would always refuse, firmly denying North Korea the opportunity to show its goodwill. This time, when North Korea proposed aid, the situation was very complex, you could say. It could be that North Korea is concerned about their compatriots in the South, as blood is thicker than water. Alternatively, you could say that North Korea doesn't genuinely want to provide aid. Rather, it's a great propaganda opportunity. After all, the other side will definitely refuse, so they gain a reputation without spending any money, which is very cost effective. Why is North Korea so convinced that South Korea would never agree? Firstly, because South Korea has never agreed before, and secondly, just a year ago, South Korea accused North Korea of attempting to assassinate the South Korean president in Myanmar, but North Korea has always claimed this was slander. This issue hasn't been clarified yet, making agreement even more unlikely. However, unexpectedly more. This time South Korea actually agreed. Now we can finally start blaming Samaranch, Nauru. The reason South Korea agreed is that they were going to host the 1988 Seoul Olympics. Moreover, they were determined to host the most successful and grandest Olympics in the history of the 20th century, so creating a peaceful atmosphere on the Korean peninsula was very important. What if North Korea extended a friendly hand and South Korea didn't appreciate it, causing trouble? On the other hand, North Korea, which extended a hand but couldn't take it back, was quite bewildered, thinking, we agreed not to offer help, right? Such a proud South Korea. Where did he go? Actually, the original plan wasn't unfeasible, but the annoying part was that during this period, although North Korea's food supply wasn't as severe as it would later become, it was already starting to tighten. Here, I can blame Samaranch once more because the Seoul Olympics put North Korea in a difficult position twice. To be fair, the Seoul Olympics were extremely successful, especially with the lobbying efforts of South Korea, China, and the Soviet Union. They all sent delegations to participate, which was no small matter. The previous two Olympic Games had been boycotted by major countries. The 1980 Moscow Olympics were boycotted by the United States and other Western countries, and the next, the 1984 Los Angeles Olympics, were boycotted by the Soviet Union and other Eastern European countries. The Seoul Olympics became the Olympic Games with the most participating countries in the 20th century, which greatly enhanced South Korea's international image, showcased its economic strength, and boosted public confidence. For North Korea, it was like hoping their brother would struggle. Yet the brother managed to forge ahead. The blow was indeed too great, and they had to regain face no matter what. So, a year later, to overshadow the Seoul Olympics, North Korea hosted the World Festival of Youth and Students. Since they were determined to make a splash, they spared no expense. In this way, within 2 years, North Korea built 260 large facilities in one go, including a table tennis hall with 4,000 seats, a badminton hall with 3,000 seats, and the largest stadium in Asia at the time. The Mayday Stadium in New Kim with 150,000 seats, and additionally 4 new hotels were built, including the famous Ryugyong Hotel, which stands 330 meters tall and was the tallest hotel in the world at the time. Construction began in 1987 with plans for 3,000 guest rooms, and it was said to include a revolving restaurant, a casino, and a nightclub. However, the hotel was never completed. In 1992, the project was completely halted due to a lack of funds. For a period, North Korea was very reluctant to mention this matter. In various promotional photos, this hotel would be directly photoshopped out. This is understandable, as it was supposed to be a symbol of North Korea's modernization and strength, but later it became more of a symbol of economic misjudgment. For the aforementioned projects, North Korea spent a total of $4 to $9 billion. Keep in mind, this was the early 1990s, and no matter which country in the world you consider, this was a significant amount of money. By the way, in contemporary mainstream international relations theory, there is a package that includes national identity theory and signaling theory. To explain simply, it means that a country, like a person, can have various identities and needs to send signals for other countries to receive. The so-called international status and international influence are like a country's self-positioning, saying, I am powerful. Then they do certain things, like holding military parades or engaging in wars to send signals like, look how powerful I am. I casually seized Kashmir or bombed Lebanon. From this perspective, South Korea hosting the Olympics was a signal that I am now rich and strong, while North Korea's construction projects were signals that I am richer and stronger than the ones upstairs. There is a specific term for this called conspicuous consumption, but sending a signal does not guarantee it will be successfully received. The significant difference in development between South Korea and North Korea afterward is a vivid example. However, this is not all. During that period, several major investments North Korea made in the production sector also failed. At this time, North Korea's food production was already under strain, so they launched an ambitious plan to convert tidal flats submerged 1 to 2 meters below sea level on the west coast into farmland, with the planned new farmland area reaching 3,000 square kilometers. This is almost half the size of present-day Shanghai. To reclaim the sea, they first needed to build a dam, so North Korea spent $1,077 billion to construct what was then the longest dam in the world, longer than both the Panama Canal and the Suez Canal. 3 divisions of the North Korean military participated in the construction, but the dam was never completed and the entire project ultimately failed. Another major failure was the Vinalon production complex. Remember we mentioned Vinalon earlier? It's the fiber extracted from coal that can be used to make clothing. This material was imbued with political significance. In North Korea, it is called Juche fiber. There are many songs in North Korea praising Juche fiber, such as Pride of the People, Pride of the Nation, and so on. North Korea began constructing a second-generation Vinalon complex, planning to produce 100,000 tons of Vinalon annually. This project was also somewhat rushed. To save time, equipment importation, factory construction, and technology development began simultaneously. However, the key was the new technology for production. The research and development failed, and without this technology, the production costs became unbearably high. As a result, the 250 completed factories and 52,000 tons of equipment turned into waste, with total losses reportedly exceeding $5 billion. Meanwhile, other countries began producing and using the more practical nylon. These failures severely impacted North Korea's economy, but an even greater blow was the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991. In 1990, North Korea's trade volume with the Soviet Union was nearly $2 billion, but in 1991 it dropped to $360 million. More importantly, Russia, which replaced the Soviet Union, no longer agreed to barter trade or to sell food and oil to North Korea at extremely low prices. On the other hand, North Korea's exports also lost the vast Soviet market. Specifically regarding food, the reduction in imports, coupled with the lack of gasoline for tractors and the byproduct fertilizers from oil refining, was one of the reasons for the subsequent food crisis in North Korea. Overall, by this period, apart from aid from China, almost all external resources for North Korea had ceased, and the North Korean economy began an unstoppable decline. At this time, North Korea faced another sorrowful event. In July 1994, Kim Il-sung passed away. This shocked the North Korean people immensely. News programs around the world broadcast images of North Koreans crying and mourning, but in later interviews by Western media, even those who defected from North Korea admitted that the feelings most North Koreans had for Kim Il-sung were genuine. It was real. Moving forward, the direction of the North Korean economy was handed over to Kim Jong-il, and that is another story.